Hey guys, it's Miss Wombles. I'm here to kind of talk you through our next standard, which is SS7G2 on Africa's environmental issues. Our standard 7G2 says to explain the environmental issues across the continent of Africa. A. Explain how water pollution and unequal access to water impacts irrigation, trade, industry, and drinking water. B. Explain the relationship between poor soil and deforestation in sub-Saharan Africa. C. Explain the impact of desertification on the environment of Africa. All right, here we go. First section on water pollution and unequal distribution. Water has always been vital to Africa. The oceans, rivers, and seas that surround and run through Africa have allowed Africans to engage in trade and to have access to the outside world. These interactions around these bodies of water have enabled certain cities to become thriving centers of commerce. Take a look at the map. You know I love a color-coded map. Everywhere you see the orangish gold color, the light yellow, and the off-white cream color are your most hardest hit areas where fresh water is not as readily available as it should be. And if you look, the continent of Africa is heavily color-coded in those three areas, as well as a place that we've studied in the past of Southwest Asia. A limited supply. Countries with large river systems have enough water for farming and for people in villages, towns, and cities. Unfortunately, the majority of Africa has trouble getting enough water for people to survive. Most African countries have very little clean water for drinking and washing. So here is the continent of Africa. Again, this is just the continent of Africa, not comparing it to the rest of the world. As you can see, the northern part of Africa, where you have the Sahara Desert, has a very high rate of water scarcity, as is South Africa. A lot of your savannas throughout Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, on the Horn of Africa near the Great Rift Valley, and even now in some of the areas of the Sahel region. Walk to water. People who live in rural areas of Africa typically don't have running water or plumbing in their homes. Women and children must walk several miles to gather water. This has caused serious economic problems for many African countries, obviously. Here's a picture of some women and children who've reached a source of water, but as you can see, the water that they've been able to find is not exactly clean and something that you would want to drink. Poverty. Because fetching water is so time-consuming, women are unable to work and children don't have time to go to school. Lack of education and employment leads to a low gross domestic product and slow economic growth. Therefore, many Africans cannot escape the circle of poverty. And we talked about the meaning of poverty. Poverty means to be poor and you don't have all of the necessities that you need. Here's some pictures showing a child in the top left holding a pot of water, and then a child in the bottom right accessing water. Obviously, that water is not suitable for drinking. Drought. Droughts are long periods of very little rainfall, have hurt many parts of Africa. When the rains do not come, crops wither away and livestock die. People who live in areas affected by drought often face famine and begin to die of starvation. Remember, famine is widespread starvation. Pollution. Many countries in Africa do not have enough clean water, even the ones that have large rivers. African countries have the problem of increasing pollution from factories and contamination from animals and human waste. Industries also contribute to the problem by dumping toxic mining chemicals and industrial wastes into the waters. Here's an example of a child in Africa who has found a water source, but this water, again, is not safe. Diseases. Clean water is needed for basic health and sanitation. Lack of clean water to wash with increases the frequency of skin and eye infections. People who are not able to have access to clean water are at risk for many waterborne diseases that spread by parasites living in standing water. Here's some examples of pollution in South Africa. Diseases. Millions of Africans are hospitalized yearly from ingesting unsafe water. Sick people are unable to work, with negatively impacts on the economy. Also, unclean drinking water is a leading cause of death for thousands of children in Africa. Industries. Local industries that depend on water sources for their livelihood have been devastated by water pollution. Water pollution either kills fish or makes them unsafe to eat. It can also kill livestock, which destroys the livelihood of herders and traders. Cleanup. Overpopulation and poor sanitation regulations have made life along Africa's water sources difficult. Some countries in Africa have tried to improve their economies by building factories. Unfortunately, government officials often ignore the industrial wastes that are being flushed into rivers and streams as long as the factories are profitable. Here's an example of a factory that has placed a pipe into a fresh water source in Africa. That could be sewage, that could be chemicals, industrial waste, what have you. Either way, it's polluting. Next issue is deforestation. As Africa's population increases and nations try to develop economically, deforestation has become a growing concern. Deforestation is the process of forests being destroyed to make way for human development. Deforestation is a major issue in many African nations. Here's an example of someone cutting down a large tree using a chainsaw in Africa. Logging. A main cause of deforestation in Africa today is commercial logging. The timber is exported all over the world and helps boost the economy of many African countries. Unfortunately, the environment is destroyed as a result. Population. Another reason Africans are cutting down so many trees is population growth. In the last 50 years, Africa's population has tripled to over 1.2 billion people. Cities have grown and have cleared large areas of forests for housing. Here's an example of that. Rainforest. Many of the rainforests that once ran from Guinea to Cameroon are already gone. Nigeria is losing its rainforest at the fastest rate. The United Nations estimates that Nigeria has now lost about 55% of its original forest due to logging, clearing land for farming, and cutting trees to use as fuel. Here's a picture to illustrate the deforestation of the rainforest. Since the 1990s, more than 90% of West African rainforests have been cut down. The effects of this: as the number of trees shrinks, we also know the amount of oxygen produced also shrinks. Meanwhile, the amount of harmful carbon dioxide in the air increases. Less rainforest could also mean fewer medicines. Surprisingly, about 1/4 of all medicines that people use come from rainforest plants. Deforestation also leads to the extinction of species of both plants and animals. Crops grow best in topsoil, which is a nutrient-rich layer of dirt. However, one of the effects of deforestation is that when trees are cut down, there's nothing to hold that topsoil in place. Erosion happens, and this is when wind and rain carry away the important nutrients, and the land will eventually lose the nutrients that is necessary for growing crops. The sun will then bake the exposed soil into hard clay, and this leads to desertification, which is coming up next. Here we go. Desertification in the Sahel region, which is one of the main parts of your geography standard, they are experiencing severe problems with this environmental issue. Desertification is the process of the desert expanding into areas that had formerly been farmland. As the land is overused, the soil becomes poor and powdery. The winds coming in from the Sahara Desert gradually blow the dry topsoil away, leaving a barren and rocky land that loses its ability to hold water. And I'll show you some pictures. First of all, we have a map of the continent of Africa, and you can see that the orange color is the actual true desert regions. But then your other two colors, your yellow and gold, show you what's at risk of desertification. So basically, your deserts might not have always been true deserts, but they're growing into deserts over time. Here's some pictures of desertification. Growing desert. A majority of the desertification is a result of the actions of people rather than climate. Desertification in Africa is caused by 1. Poor farming practices, 2. People cutting down the trees that help hold the soil in place, 3. Animals being allowed to graze too heavily in an area and stripping all of the vegetation from the soil, 4. Draining the surface of underground water for industrial and home use. Here's some more pictures of places that are now more desert than anything else due to those reasons. The effects of this, the survival needs of the people living there are clear, but they are destroying major parts of the environment in the process. Africans who have lived for generations by farming and grazing animals are finding that they have less and less land available for those animals. The people who live in these areas often face starvation and poverty. Many move into urban city areas hoping to find work, but most only find more poverty. Another picture to illustrate desertification. So what's the solution here? Some Africans work hard to try and replant trees, to build windbreaks to keep out the sand, and to push the desert back whenever they can. In many parts of Africa, this has actually become a losing battle, though, as the desert claims more land each year. In recent years, the United Nations and the World Food Bank have come to the aid of those living in parts of the Sahel region. They have worked to find solutions to help the people survive and live a better life. Thank you for watching this presentation. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me through Remind or my email.